Thank you very much, Dr. Williams. It's an honor to have you here, and it's certainly a great honor to have the opportunity to respond to your rich, nuanced, and thought-provoking presentation. This, as you say, is a ground-clearing primary first lecture, and you've deftly and quickly cut straight to the heart of what is haunting modern liberal democracy and contemporary rights talk, namely the contemporary crisis of atomistic individualism, the dangers of abstract and reified liberal rights, and the desperate contemporary need for a contextualized social imaginary of reciprocity, mutuality, and a concern for the common good. Many contemporary theologians and ethicists come to this discussion from one of two camps: those who primarily see conflict between theology and human rights, and those who primarily see convergence. For those of us who primarily see conflict, you have pointed out not only a common historical ancestry between theology and human rights, you've also pointed out a number of ways in which contemporary rights talk continually connects with and remains haunted by its theological origins and a Christian understanding of the moral fabric of humanity and creation. Likewise, for those of us who are more comfortable with human rights, who see a convergence between theology and human rights, for those of us who regularly, freely, and often uncritically appropriate rights language in our Christian discussions, you have pointed out several deep conceptual chasms that have opened up between a contemporary grounding of rights rooted in the sovereign will of the individual and a Christian understanding of rights rooted in the sovereign will and love of God. So you've not only cleared the ground for us, but you've set the table for a rich theological discussion, and I believe I speak for all of us when I say that I am excited for the feast to begin tomorrow. With that said, I have 3 points that I'd like to press, and my hope is that at least one of these points you will find worthy of some reflection and comment. So we're going to go with 3. At multiple points, you stress the need for a contemporary conception of rights that is to be made thicker, deeper, more robust, more complex, more reciprocal, and more grounded in a sense of the common good. You stress this desire for a more robust sense of rights in an age when the little rights talk that we have seems to be teetering and even threatening to topple over. And yet you want to make it larger, more ambitious, and more unwieldy. So that's my first question for you, is a little bit of a softball. Why not go the minimalist route? Why not try to salvage rights discourse by making it smaller, thinner, less ambitious, and more limited? In a diverse society, why try to tackle that treacherous discussion of a, quote, common good? My second question has to do with the relationship between the intellectual concept of rights and the spiritual longing to see those rights actually upheld. I've spent some time in both Europe and the United States studying the rapid growth of right-wing nationalism, populism, and particularly Islamophobia. At this historical moment, it's clear that we are witnessing a growing Western spirit of hostility towards the idea of Muslim rights and freedoms. When I was in the Netherlands speaking with a Dutch sociologist who's studying these trends, he said something interesting to me. He said, you can explain to Dutch citizens that Muslim immigrants have rights, the rights to assemble, to express, to wear particular clothing. And the Dutch citizens will intellectually understand your claims for rights, and they will, to some extent, intellectually agree. However, the problem is that these citizens no longer feel a deep desire for those rights in their bones. They no longer long or hope for a society in which religious minorities like Islam will have those rights deeply honored at all costs. I raise this point because I believe that your lecture is haunted by the question of culture, political spirit, and desire at nearly every turn. namely that what this political moment requires is not simply a better intellectual articulation of human rights and reciprocity. What we need is also a cultural longing that deeply desires, values, and yearns for that right and that reciprocity to be made manifest. Thus, the question is this: ought not theologians focus their attention more on the cultivation of a culture of justitia, one that not only understands justitia as an intellectual concept to be articulated, but as a virtue to be practiced and a telos to be longed for? Finally, at a couple of points, you very briefly mentioned the importance of smaller communities, associations, and solidarities. You mention an individual's need for small communal spaces and shared experiences of reciprocity as spaces in which we can practice this mutuality, this sharing. I would love for you to speak more to the importance of associational and communal life for this discourse on rights. There is, of course, a large and growing body of literature which speaks to the importance of small associations and religious communities as absolutely critical to democratic health. These associations provide a critical buffer between the exposed and vulnerable individual and the enormous and sometimes overwhelming state. They provide a space for individuals to be nurtured, empowered, protected, matured, and trained to negotiate issues and a larger environment of complex power dynamics. These associations, like Fuller Theological Seminary, have the ability to train and discipline their members in practices of reciprocity, mutuality, and a commitment to a good that is larger than their own individual self. Finally, these communities help their members develop a social imaginary that is far more complex than simply individual versus state, consumer versus producer. For example, my own engagement with associations and communities helps me understand myself not only as a rights bearer, but as a contributing member to a family, to a church, to a school, a neighborhood, a city, a country, and a globe. Therefore, it's not just Matthew versus the United States government, something I would never want to see. But instead, I see myself as Matthew as interwoven in a complex set of relationships of both rights and reciprocity into all of these complex communities. I don't expect the state to fulfill my every desire and happiness because of my thick connection to these other communities. Thus, my final question is this: if associations, communities, and families are a way to further the cause of reciprocity and relationality, might theologians need to follow the medieval imagination of the social jurist Althusius and focus more on the rights of associations and not simply individuals? In conclusion, I suspect that your careful attention to both the conflict and the convergence between theology and human rights might lead some of us in the audience to guess that you are leading us towards some sort of moderate space positioned between theology and human rights discourse. 50% theology, 50% politics. 1 foot in the church and 1 foot in the public square. Sort of theological, sort of public. I'm so grateful that that is not actually the case. You are committed to thinking theologically and Christianly all the way down and all the way out, 100% without apology. You are also committed to engaging publicly in this pluralistic discussion of rights on behalf of all of those who are on the underside of power, without retreat, without cynicism, 100% without apology. No moderation between the two discourses of rights and theology, but an alternative third way that takes seriously and, most importantly, places Christ as the origin, the essence, and the end of any articulation of rights and reciprocity. And for that, I am grateful.